Darius Caldwell didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. When Officer Valerie Denton pulled him over, accused him of drunk driving, and mocked his ID, he stayed calm. Because he knew who he was, a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army. But she didn't care. To her, he was just another black man to put in his place. Can quiet dignity stand up to loud injustice and win? If this made you pause, go ahead and like, share, or comment. Now, let's go back to that night on Reynolds Road and see what really happened. It was almost midnight when Darius Caldwell turned onto Reynolds Road, the hum of his government-issued SUV the only sound breaking the silence of Fremont, Ohio. The kind of quiet that only small towns knew after dark. Most of the homes lining the street had gone to sleep. Porch lights glowed like tired eyes, and a soft wind moved through the trees, brushing against fences and old mailboxes. Darius wasn't in a hurry. He rarely was. At 49, with over 2 decades of service behind him, he'd learned that rushing often came at the cost of clarity. He was driving home from a long strategy meeting at Fort Wayne, 2 hours south. His uniform was in the back seat. He wore a gray sweater, slacks, nothing flashy. The SUV had federal plates. But in that moment, none of it mattered. A patrol car was sitting just off the road, tucked behind a utility box, lights off. Engine humming. It could have been coincidence, or it could have been exactly what it looked like, a waiting spot. The lights blinked on, blue and red, sudden, sharp. Darius exhaled through his nose and guided the SUV to the curb, smooth, controlled. Hands already at 10 and 2, window halfway down, breathing steady. A few houses down behind a lace curtain, someone moved, just a faint shadow but present, watching. The cruiser door slammed. Out stepped Officer Valerie Denton, early 30s, straight-backed, and walking like the street belonged to her. She came straight to the driver's side, one hand on her holster, the other holding a flashlight that cut into his face without warning. No greeting, no reason. License and registration. Darius blinked once against the light but didn't move. Evening, officer. May I ask the reason for the stop? She leaned in slightly. You were drifting? Looked like you might be under the influence. I wasn't, he replied, calmly. I'm coming back from a military base. This is a government vehicle. She didn't ask which base, didn't glance at the plates, just lifted her chin slightly and said, License and registration, sir. Her tone made sir sound more like a challenge than respect. Darius kept his hands visible, moving slowly, one toward the glove box, the other remaining on the wheel. He handed her both documents, including his federal ID card. She glanced at the ID, gave a short laugh through her nose. You military? Yes, Lieutenant Colonel Darius Caldwell. She turned the card over like it might be fake, then handed it back without comment. That doesn't mean you're above the law, she muttered. I never said I was. Her posture tightened. Step out of the vehicle. Darius didn't move. I'm sorry? I said step out of the car. I'm conducting a sobriety test. He held her gaze. Officer, I haven't been drinking. I've done nothing erratic. I'd just like to know. Her voice snapped. Are you refusing a lawful order? No, he said evenly. I'm asking for clarification. She reached down, popped the door open herself. The movement was sharp, unnecessary, and filled with assertion. That's when he reached down and, without a word, tapped the record button on his phone. Then he looked up at her, expression still calm. For the record, he said quietly, this interaction is being documented. There was a flicker in her eyes, surprise or calculation, but she recovered fast. Out, now. He stepped out, straightened, hands still visible. There was no defiance in him, but there was no submission either. Just control, the kind that couldn't be taught, only earned. She told him to walk the line. He did. Under the cold glow of a street lamp, his shadow moved with discipline, heel to toe, arms steady. Not a stumble. She stood with her arms crossed, watching like she was waiting for him to fail. When he didn't, she tore a citation from her pad and slapped it against the palm of her hand. Failure to maintain lane, she said flatly, offering it without eye contact. As he took it, her fingers brushed his, quick, almost careless. She turned to walk back to her cruiser. Behind one window across the street, the lace curtain shifted again, just slightly. Someone watching, still not intervening. Like they'd seen this before. Darius looked down at the paper in his hand. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His eyes followed her retreat, but not with anger, with something heavier. He got back in his SUV, clicked his seatbelt into place, sat there for a full 5 seconds before pulling off. There was no roar of an engine, no tires spinning in frustration, just silence, and that camera, still recording in the cup holder beside him. She had the badge, she had the power that night, but she had no idea who she had just handed that ticket to. And even less idea what he was going to do with it. She made him walk the line again. Not because he stumbled the first time. Not because there was anything wrong with his balance, or the way he moved, or the steadiness of his voice when he answered her questions. But because she could. Darius Caldwell stepped forward and back as instructed, arms at his sides, eyes ahead. The pavement was cold under his soles, but his movements were clean. No sway, no hesitation. Just years of muscle memory, quiet discipline, formed under heat and pressure, now moving slowly under the flicker of a street lamp on a forgotten Ohio street. Officer Valerie Denton stood 10 feet back, arms crossed, hip cocked slightly, hand grazing the holster again, watching like a schoolteacher waiting for a mistake. Her mouth didn't say much, but her eyes did. There was no curiosity in her stare, just a conclusion waiting to be confirmed. He finished the test, stood tall. Didn't ask what came next. She didn't say thank you. Didn't say you're clear. She just pulled out her pad and began scribbling, the scratch of her pen slicing the night in short, irritated bursts. Failure to maintain lane, she muttered, tearing the paper without looking up. Darius remained still, hands relaxed at his sides. She stepped closer, holding out the ticket. As he reached for it, she spoke louder and clearer than anything she'd said so far. Don't care who you are. On this road, I make the rules. It wasn't the words. Not entirely. It was the way she said them, measured, intentional, as if she needed him to hear it. As if his quiet, his posture, the calm with which he stood there, had somehow challenged her. And this was her way of reclaiming the space. Darius took the paper without speaking, folded it once and slipped it into the side pocket of his jacket. He didn't thank her, didn't argue. There was nothing else to say. Across the street, a porch light flicked on. A screen door creaked open, and a woman stepped out onto her porch. Barefoot. Bathrobe cinched tight, holding the hand of a boy who looked no older than 8. They didn't say anything, just stood there, watching. Valerie turned to head back to her cruiser, muttering something under her breath that the wind didn't quite carry. Darius opened the door to his SUV, moving slowly, not out of fear, but because he knew exactly what moments like this could become. And he wasn't about to give her a reason. He sat down, closed the door gently, and reached for the ignition. From the porch, the boy's voice cut the quiet like a whisper meant to be heard. "Mom," he asked, "why is the black man getting yelled at?" His mother didn't answer, or maybe she couldn't. Darius didn't look their way. He didn't need to. He knew that sound, knew that kind of silence, knew it didn't belong to him, but to generations before him, men who had stood taller than him, walked straighter than him, served longer than him, and still been spoken to like they were less than. He pressed the start button. The engine turned over softly. No sudden movements, just forward. As he pulled away, the reflection of Valerie's cruiser shrank in the rearview mirror, but her words didn't. On this road, I make the rules. He'd heard it before, said differently, dressed in different uniforms, sometimes more polite, sometimes more brutal, but always the same core. You don't belong here, not as you are, not in that car, not with that calm, not with that name. Darius drove in silence. The road ahead clear, no more flashing lights, no sirens, just the low hum of tires and a growing weight in his chest that had nothing to do with traffic laws. He thought of the boy on the porch. He wondered what that child would take away from tonight. Maybe nothing. Maybe it would pass like fog, but maybe, just maybe, it would settle somewhere deep. Become a story that shaped the way he moved through the world. And that, more than the citation, more than the flashlight in his face, more than the unwanted field test, that was the part Darius couldn't let go. Not this time. Because the moment she opened his car door without cause, the moment she dismissed his ID like it was some cheap excuse, the moment she said that line, not as a slip but a statement, that was the moment this stopped being a routine stop. This was something else, and she had no idea who she had just given that ticket to, no idea what kind of silence she had provoked, but she would, soon. Because Darius Caldwell didn't raise his voice, he didn't slam doors, he didn't shout back, he documented, he remembered. And when the time came, he would act, quietly, precisely, and with the full weight of the uniform she chose to ignore. Back at the station, the air felt thicker than usual. The kind of thickness that came from too much silence, pressed up against the cheap hum of vending machines, and the distant static of a police radio no one was really listening to. Officer Valerie Denton walked in with that loose, half-proud strut she wore after every traffic stop that gave her just enough of a thrill to feel important. She tossed her citation pad onto the corner of the desk and unzipped her vest halfway, letting the adrenaline settle into smugness. Diaz was leaning against the far counter, flipping through call logs, half bored, half awake. He barely looked up when she spoke. "Another one with an attitude," she said casually, grabbing a half-empty bottle of water off the break room shelf. "Thought he could outtalk me. Pulled the military card like I was supposed to bow or something." Diaz raised an eyebrow, just slightly. "Military?" She rolled her eyes. "Yeah. Claimed to be some lieutenant colonel. Had a government ID, car with Fed plates, the whole bit. Still swerving like anyone else. You know how they are. Flash a badge or some little laminated card like it makes them untouchable." He didn't respond right away, just set the clipboard down and looked over, his expression unreadable. "You get his name?" She unscrewed the cap, took a long sip, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "Caldwell. Darius Caldwell. Tall, older, real calm type. Too calm if you ask me. The kind that thinks silence earns him points." Diaz didn't speak, but something in his face changed. Not much, not enough for her to notice if she wasn't paying attention. But he straightened slightly, shifted his weight, then looked toward the hallway just over her shoulder. Sergeant Nina Torres had paused mid-step. She wasn't close enough to be part of the conversation, but she wasn't far enough to miss it either. For just a moment, she stood there, one hand on her clipboard, the other curled lightly around a coffee mug that had long gone cold. She didn't say a word, didn't make a sound, but her eyes locked onto Valerie with a quiet that carried weight. Valerie didn't turn to see her. She was too busy telling her story. "Guy kept trying to explain himself like I was gonna care. I told him straight, doesn't matter who you are, you fit the pattern, you get pulled. He didn't like that." From the hallway, Nina still didn't move. She just blinked, slowly. Then she turned and walked away. Diaz finally spoke, voice lower than before. "You said Caldwell?" "Yeah?" He paused. "You know who that is?" She shrugged, some Fed with an attitude. But he didn't answer. He just picked up the clipboard again and didn't look at her. The room didn't shift, the lights didn't dim, nothing radic happened. But if you were paying attention, you could feel something settle, like the drop before a storm. Small, quiet, but real. And later, when Valerie sat down to file her report, she didn't think twice about what she'd said. Didn't think about the ID. Didn't think about the camera. Didn't think about the people who had heard her words, even if they hadn't challenged her yet. Because in her mind, it was just another stop, just another citation, just another driver. She had no idea she just handed a piece of paper to a man who didn't need to raise his voice to make the system tremble. And she had no idea that Sergeant Nina Torres hadn't just heard her. She'd remembered her. And she wasn't going to forget. Not this time. Darius Caldwell sat at the edge of his bed, the lamp casting a warm, tired glow on the silver frame of an old photo. 3 young soldiers in desert fatigues, arms around each other, dirt on their faces, fire in their eyes. One of them was him, the man in the middle, the one who had never backed down from a mission, never wavered under pressure. But tonight, the silence in his own home felt heavier than any battlefield he'd ever stood on. Sleep wouldn't come. Not after what happened on that roadside, and not after what it reminded him of. He could still hear the sharp voice of a white officer back when he was just a private, pulling him out of a base vehicle, slamming him against the hood in front of the others, accusing him of stealing military property. Darius had tried to explain it was his own duffel bag, but it didn't matter. There were no cameras back then, no phone to record. Just the humiliation and the sound of his own breath catching in his chest. No one believed him afterward, not even the staff sergeant he looked up to. He let that moment go, buried it, moved on. But not this time. He reached for his phone and opened the saved video file. Valerie Denton's voice played again, condescending, careless, and loud. His own voice, calm and deliberate, barely rose above a whisper. The contrast was unbearable. So was the truth behind it. He scrolled through his contacts and found a name he hadn't called in years, Marlon Price, now a senior attorney with the Judge Advocate General's office. They had served together in Kandahar. Marlon was the one who always said, "Silence might keep you safe, but it never sets you free." Darius tapped the video file and hit share. Seconds later, he was speaking to Marlon. "This isn't about ego," Darius said after explaining the situation. "It's about principle." On the other end, Marlon was quiet for a moment. "You sure you want to make this official?" he asked. "Once you file, there's no going back. They'll dig through everything, your past, your file, even your medals." Darius leaned back, rubbing his forehead. "If I don't do this," he said softly, "then I'm no better than the silence I've hated my whole life." That landed heavy. Marlon nodded slowly, though Darius couldn't see it. "All right," Marlon said. "Send me the clip. I'll advise you on language for the formal complaint. But this may not end clean." "Nothing worth doing ever does," Darius answered. He spent the next hour drafting the official complaint. It was clinical, factual, not emotional. He stated the time, location, officer's name, her behavior, his credentials, the refusal to acknowledge his ID, the unlawful ticket, the humiliating tone. He attached the video and titled the file, "Incident Report, Roadside Traffic Stop, May 12th. He sent it to 3 places: Internal Affairs, the Office of the Inspector General, and the State Civil Rights Division. With every document uploaded, he felt a pressure slowly lifting, replaced by something heavier, something older, something closer to duty. Then he looked back at that photo of the 3 soldiers again. The one in the middle had scars on the outside and in. He picked it up, stared at it for a long time, then whispered to the stillness of the room, "Funny how I'm safer in a war zone than on this street." That line didn't need to be written down. It was already burned into his bones. He turned off the light, but he didn't close his eyes. Not yet. Not until someone, somewhere, had to look at what that video showed and explain why a decorated officer had to be treated like a threat in his own country just for driving home. And in that quiet, you could almost feel something shift. Like the first pull of a tide, slow, steady, and impossible to ignore. It was just after 9 in the morning when Officer Valerie Denton was summoned to Captain Rise's office. She walked down the narrow hallway with the same confident stride she used on patrol, her shoulders back, jaw tight, like the world owed her a little respect it hadn't yet delivered. Around her, the chatter in the bullpen dimmed just slightly, but she didn't notice. Or maybe she didn't care. Rise's door was already ajar. He didn't look up when she knocked. "Sit," he said, voice flat, eyes still locked on the laptop screen in front of him. Valerie slid into the chair across from his desk. She waited. No greeting, no nod, just silence and the steady hum of the ceiling fan overhead. Then he turned the screen toward her and pressed play. There was no introduction, no explanation, just the footage the one Darius Caldwell had recorded. The dash lights, the steady calm of his voice as he repeated 3 separate times, "I am Lieutenant Colonel Darius Caldwell, United States Army. This is a government-issued vehicle. I'm returning from a secured briefing." Then her voice, sharp, interrupting, disbelieving. Valerie's jaw clenched. She glanced away, but Rise wasn't looking at the video anymore. He was looking at her. "You heard him, didn't you?" he asked. Valerie crossed her arms. It was dark. He looked edgy. Most folks who get pulled over act nervous, but he was too calm. That's what raised my flags. Reyes raised an eyebrow. "Too calm?" he echoed. She shifted in her seat. "That's not how I remember it." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, took off his glasses, and spoke with the kind of quiet that lands heavier than a shout. "That video remembers everything." The words lingered between them, heavier than the silence that followed. Valerie tried to regroup. "You think I did something wrong?" she asked. Not defensive yet, but cautious, like she was testing the ground before stepping forward. Reyes didn't respond to that either. He reached into the desk drawer, pulled out a small envelope, and placed it face down on the desk between them. "Internal Affairs is opening a preliminary review," he said. "Standard when a formal complaint comes in with video evidence attached." Valerie's mouth opened slightly, then closed. She didn't reach for the envelope. "I've had your back more times than I can count," Reyes said, voice still low but firmer now. "But this This isn't like the others. This man wasn't just anyone, Denton. He's not some hothead mouthing off or playing games. He's a senior officer in the U.S. Army. His record's spotless. Valerie's throat tightened. So what? I didn't know who he was? I treated him like anyone else? Isn't that what we're supposed to do? Reyes shook his head slowly. No, he said. You treated him like someone who didn't belong in that car or on that road, and that's not the same thing. The room went quiet again. Outside, someone's radio crackled faintly in the hallway. Valerie's stare fell to the envelope. You said IA's just reviewing, right? That's routine. Reyes didn't nod. He didn't offer comfort. And for the first time since she'd joined the force, Valerie Denton felt a subtle shift beneath her feet, like the ground she thought was solid might not hold. She rose from her seat, nodding stiffly, hands clenched. But before she could leave, Reyes spoke again so softly she almost missed it. You know what gets people in trouble around here? It's not the mistake. It's pretending it never happened. She paused in the doorway. Didn't turn around. Didn't answer. She walked back through the hallway slower this time. Eyes followed her, but no one said a word. At her desk, she sat down, stared at her screen, and tapped her pen against the table once, twice, then stopped. She didn't open the email from IA right away, because for the first time, Valerie wasn't entirely sure someone would be there to cover for her. And in a place where loyalty was everything, silence could be the loudest response of all. The envelope came on a gray Thursday morning, slipped into the precinct's internal mail tray like any other memo, except this one was sealed tighter, heavier in the hand, and addressed in crisp block lettering that left no room for misunderstanding. Valerie Denton tore it open with the tip of her nail, halfway through a sip of burnt coffee, expecting another routine administrative update. But the moment her eyes landed on the header, Notice of Civil Rights Violation Inquiry, her stomach flipped. She read it twice. Then a third time, slower. She was being summoned. Not for an internal review, not a slap on the wrist. This was different. This was federal. Someone had filed an official complaint alleging racial bias, abuse of power, and unlawful detention. And the Department of Justice was now involved. Her first reaction wasn't fear, it was rage. She shoved her chair back so fast it screeched against the linoleum, stormed into the hallway, punched in the number of someone she hadn't called in months, Deputy Chief Marlon Briggs. He'd covered for her before, smoothed things over, handled nuisances like this with a quick call or a well-timed report that vanished before it hit the paper trail. But this time, the line rang. Once, twice, 4 times, then voicemail. She hung up. Called again. Nothing. Her chest tightened as a thought slid into her mind uninvited. Maybe they're leaving you out to dry. She walked faster now, cutting through the bullpen, brushing past officers who nodded awkward hellos she didn't return. In her office, she shut the door and tried 2 more numbers. One went straight to voicemail. The other connected, but the voice on the other end sounded colder than she remembered. I'm not getting involved, Valerie. Not this time. Click. For the first time in years, her hands trembled. Across the city, the man she'd pulled over, Darius Caldwell, was sitting at his desk in a quiet military office with no visible rank on display. He wasn't in uniform today, just a dark gray shirt, sleeves rolled up, glasses resting near a stack of folders. He moved with a calm precision, flipping through a personnel file while a soft jazz tune hummed from the small speaker behind him. He hadn't said a word to the media, hadn't posted a single message on social media. He hadn't even answered the growing number of emails from veterans advocacy groups who'd caught wind of the incident and offered their support. To the outside world, he seemed almost untouched. But inside that quiet office, something had shifted. His assistant, Serena, stepped into the doorway holding a tablet. Sir, the press called again. That's the 5th outlet this week asking for an interview. He looked up slowly, met her eyes. They want a statement, she said gently. A voice, something they can print. Darius didn't blink, didn't smile. I'll speak, he said, in court. Serena nodded, sensing the finality in his voice. She lingered a moment longer, then stepped back out, closing the door behind her. Alone again, Darius leaned back in his chair. He stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint trumpet solo drifting through the speaker. He didn't want headlines. He didn't need a camera in his face. What he wanted was quiet. The kind of quiet that came with accountability. the kind that arrived not in fury, but in facts. And he knew this wasn't about revenge. It was about principle. At the precinct, Valerie paced like a caged animal. Her hands shook as she typed up a furious email, half plea, half warning to another superior who had once praised her instincts. The words spilled out. This is overblown. That man wasn't even respectful. He was hiding something. I was doing my job. But before she hit send, she stopped. She read the message again, then deleted it. Somewhere deep in her gut, she realized the language she was using, the same tone she'd leaned on for years, no longer held weight. Not after the video. Not after the silence from the people she thought would shield her. And maybe, just maybe, they'd never believed her at all. They had just tolerated her. As the day dragged on, her desk phone didn't ring. No one offered reassurance. No one dropped by her office with a knowing smile or a reassuring hand on the shoulder. By the time the sun dipped behind the buildings and the precinct lights flickered to their overnight dim, Valerie Denton was still sitting there, shoulders tight, lips pressed thin, staring at the wall. For the first time in her career, no one was coming. The courtroom wasn't crowded that morning. At least, not the way people expect it to be in high-profile cases. There were no flashing cameras, no line of reporters outside, no buzz of journalists whispering predictions. Just quiet leather shoes on tile floors, the rustling of paperwork, and the soft murmur of voices too tired to pretend they cared. It was supposed to be another hearing, just another procedural step, a routine dispute. But that morning, something felt different. It started the moment the side door opened. At first, no one noticed. The judge was still reviewing her files. The clerk was typing. Valerie sat stiff in her chair, flipping through her own set of notes, a pen tapping lightly against her palm. Her lawyer whispered something, but she didn't respond. Her hands were too tight, her thoughts running too fast. Then came the sound. Not loud, not commanding. Just the solid, deliberate rhythm of boots on polished floor. 3 steps in, and it wasn't just footsteps anymore. It was presence, it was weight, heads began to turn, and then he appeared. Darius Caldwell walked in with his posture so straight it looked like it had been forged in steel. He wore full dress uniform, not out of vanity, not to make a point, but because it was who he was. The medals on his chest didn't glint. They sat quietly like echoes of things survived. His cap tucked neatly under one arm, the other hand free, relaxed, as if he had nothing to prove, nothing to fear. But everyone saw it. The judge looked up from her bench and blinked twice before catching herself. The bailiff froze mid-sentence. A young intern dropped a stack of papers and scrambled to pick them up without making noise. On the far end of the room, a court reporter's fingers hovered above her keyboard, suspended in pause. And Valerie Denton, sitting just 10 feet away, didn't lift her head. She saw the boots first, then the crease of the uniform. And for a brief, flickering moment, her eyes traveled up then down again, like she couldn't bear the weight of the man she once dismissed on the side of the road. Her throat tightened. She shifted in her seat, adjusted her collar, looked to her attorney like maybe he could shield her from what was coming. But even he was watching Darius now, because it wasn't just Darius who walked in. Behind him, 5 men followed, then 2 women, all in uniform, all solemn, all silent. They filled the back row of the courtroom without a word. No nods, no salutes, no chatter, just presence. As if they had no need to speak, because their being there was louder than anything they could have said. And the thing was, they hadn't been invited. They hadn't been called as witnesses. They just came. Somehow they'd heard, and they showed up. Not for a protest, not to make headlines, just to stand, just to witness. Darius didn't look at Valerie as he passed. He didn't glance at the gallery or acknowledge the quiet stares from the jury box. He moved like he had rehearsed this 100 times in his head, but never with a hint of arrogance. Only clarity, only purpose. He took his seat at the front, folded his hands, waited. Not once did he speak, and yet the air in the room shifted. Like everyone had just realized the man they thought they knew, this so-called angry driver or problem on patrol, was something entirely different. Someone entirely more. And Valerie, she felt it. For the first time, the story she had told, the version she had sold with such confidence, was cracking. Not because someone yelled, not because someone argued, but because a man who had been humiliated chose not to retaliate. He simply showed up. and the truth followed. As the judge called the room to order, the silence that settled wasn't out of respect. It was out of awe, because sometimes justice doesn't begin with a verdict. It begins the moment someone dares to walk into the room and refuses to look away. The courtroom was filled with a quiet tension that wrapped around every wooden bench and every whispered breath. No one moved, no one dared. Darius Caldwell sat in his pressed uniform, eyes steady, spine straight. The courtroom was cold, but he radiated a kind of calm that didn't come from arrogance, it came from something deeper. A man who had stood in war zones and lost brothers beside him didn't tremble under ceilings of fluorescent light. When the judge asked him to speak, Darius didn't rise like someone seeking revenge. He rose like someone carrying the weight of every silent moment he'd swallowed just to keep the peace. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize. He simply described what had happened, word for word, moment by moment. From the second Officer Valerie Denton's lights flashed in his rearview mirror to the moment she wrote him a ticket while his credentials still sat in her hand. He never pointed a finger. He didn't need to. The screen behind him did that for him. The first clip began to play. It was from his dashcam, grainy, yes, but clear enough to hear his voice say calmly, "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Caldwell, driving a government vehicle home after a security briefing." Clear enough to see Valerie's hand stay inches from her holster the entire time. Clear enough to show her smirking as she forced him to walk a straight line. Even after he'd identified himself 3 times. You could feel the room lean forward, breath held. And just when you thought it couldn't get heavier, the second video played, this one from Valerie's own body camera. Her voice was sharper here, dripping with skepticism. "You fit the pattern," she'd said. "Don't care who you are. On this road, I make the rules." The way she said it wasn't just about power, it was about ownership. Like the badge gave her more than authority, it gave her permission. Valerie sat at the defendant's table, jaw clenched so tight her teeth might have cracked. She didn't look at the screen, didn't look at Darius. And for the first time since this began, her usual confidence, the smirk, the crossed arms was gone. She looked small. Then came the voice no one expected. "I'd like to speak, Your Honor." All eyes turned to the back of the courtroom. Sergeant Nina Torres stood up slowly. Her uniform was neat, but there was something in her presence that said she hadn't come here as a soldier. She'd come here as a witness, not of the law, but of lived truth. The judge allowed her to take the stand. Nina sat down, folded her hands in her lap, and looked at the jury not with anger, but with clarity. 3 years ago, she began, I was off duty walking home after a funeral in plain clothes. Officer Denton pulled up, lights flashing. No greeting, no explanation. Just, "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" I told her I was a sergeant in the U.S. Army. She told me, "You people say that all the time." She made me get on my knees on the sidewalk, told me to stop lying before she found out who I really was. There were no cameras that night, just my word and hers. She paused, then glanced toward Darius. This time there was a camera, 2 of them, and I'm here because the truth finally has a witness that can't be silenced. For a moment, no one breathed. Valerie shifted uncomfortably. Her attorney leaned in to whisper, but she waved him off and stood. "Objection," she snapped. "That's not what happened. She's twisting things." The judge turned to her slowly. "Officer Denton, you'll have a chance to respond, but I suggest you choose your words carefully." Valerie sat back down, visibly rattled. Then the judge looked to Darius. "Is there anything you'd like to add, Colonel?" Darius stood again, not out of pride, but out of something that lived deeper than pride, dignity. He didn't speak for long. "I didn't come here to destroy someone's career," he said, voice steady. "I came here because silence lets it happen again and again. I've worn this uniform long enough to know when to speak and when to endure. But this time, silence would have been complicity." He looked around the courtroom, not with triumph, but with clarity. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here so that no child ever has to ask their mother again, 'Why is the black man being yelled at?'" A quiet gasp came from the back of the room. No one knew where it came from, but it didn't matter, because it wasn't just a gasp of surprise, it was the sound of a truth finally landing where it belonged. And in that moment, even those who had once defended the system had no words left to say. As he descended the courthouse steps, Darius felt the wind shift, not the air itself, but the feeling in the crowd. There was no applause, no chants, just a silence so dense it hummed. A few people stood with hands in their pockets, heads tilted slightly. Others had phones in hand, not raised for recording, but simply held like they didn't want to interrupt something sacred. A young black father held his daughter's hand at the bottom of the steps. She couldn't have been more than 6. She looked up at Darius, wide-eyed, and asked her father in a voice everyone could hear, "Is he the man from the video?" Her father knelt and replied, "He's the reason that video matters, baby." That moment, unscripted, pure, was more powerful than any press conference. Inside the judge's chambers, paperwork was being filed. The penalty had been announced. $35,000 in damages, a formal admission of civil rights violation, and a permanent record of misconduct attached to Valerie's personnel file. For Darius, none of that changed the years of quiet endurance. But it was a beginning. Not a victory to celebrate, but a door left open for others. Valerie exited through a side door. Her lawyer whispered something urgent, but she wasn't listening. Her eyes scanned the parking lot, as if hoping anyone might be there. No partner, no fellow officers, not even a friend. When the cameras turned toward her, she lowered her head, brushing past a mother holding her son. The boy stepped behind his mother, staring at her with a strange mix of fear and curiosity. Valerie kept walking. At that same moment, Darius was surrounded by reporters. Mics pointed at him like weapons, questions fired in rapid bursts. "What do you want the public to take from this? Do you forgive Officer Denton? Is this the end of the story for you?" Darius didn't raise his voice, didn't flinch. He looked at the first camera and said softly, "There are people out there who wake up every day hoping the system will finally see them. Today it did. Not loudly, but clearly." He paused, then added, "But I didn't stand in that courtroom for myself. I stood for every person who never got to speak, for the ones no one believed, for the ones who never had a camera rolling." Then he walked away, not with triumph, but with quiet gravity. Back in her car, Valerie sat alone. The keys were in the ignition, but her hands stayed in her lap. Her badge, once proudly worn on her chest, now sat in a small envelope on the passenger seat. It looked smaller than she remembered, or maybe she had just finally seen its weight. Inside the building, Sergeant Nina Torres lingered by the window, watching Valerie's car pull out. She didn't gloat. She didn't even nod, but she whispered to herself just loud enough for no one to hear, "About time." And in a nearby hallway, a group of young recruits gathered around a small monitor showing the courtroom clip. One of them turned to the others and said, "We have to be better. All of us." Another added, "It takes one man standing tall for the rest to remember what integrity looks like." In that courthouse, and far beyond it, something had shifted. Not loudly, but permanently. It was a quiet morning at the academy. No cameras, no microphones, just rows of fresh recruits in crisp blue uniforms, their boots still stiff, their eyes still learning where to look. The lecture hall wasn't full, but it didn't need to be. Darius Caldwell stood at the front, not in dress blues this time, just a dark shirt and slacks. There was no badge pinned to his chest, no title announced before his name. Just the man, and the silence. He didn't begin with a story about court. He didn't mention Valerie Denton, or the video, or the number the judge had said out loud. None of that. Instead, he started with a question. "How many of you wanted to wear the badge so you could protect people?" A few hands went up, slow but proud. "How many of you wanted to feel respected?" More hands this time. He nodded. "I get it," he said. "I was 19 when I signed up for the army. I wanted the same thing. I thought the uniform would give me a voice. Make people listen, make me matter." He took a slow breath, letting the room lean in. "But then one day," he said, "a man I trusted put his knee on another soldier's neck, said he looked suspicious walking back to base. No camera, no report, just bruises. I filed a complaint. Nothing happened." The recruits were silent. One of them blinked hard. Darius stepped forward just once. "I'm not here to scare you," he said. "I'm here to remind you. This badge, this uniform, it's not a shield, it's a weight." A pause. "And if you can't carry it with discipline, with self-control, with humility, you don't deserve to carry it at all." He let that settle. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't anger. It was gravity, pure and quiet. One recruit raised his hand, cautious. "Sir, what do you do when you see a fellow officer cross the line?" Darius looked at him for a long moment. "You remember who the badge belongs to," he said. "It doesn't belong to your ego, or your partner's pride, or your union. It belongs to the people." He turned slightly, pointing to the academy's wall lined with framed portraits of officers lost in the line of duty. "Those faces behind you, they didn't die for silence." In the hallway outside, a few instructors had gathered, listening without speaking. Even they weren't immune to the weight of his words. Darius continued, softer now. "Months ago, a woman saw me in my car. She didn't see the uniform, didn't ask questions, didn't pause. All she saw was a black man with confidence, and she decided I was a threat." He looked up. She didn't see the soldier, but now the whole country does. No one moved, no one clapped, they just absorbed it. Because in that room something shifted, not with noise, not with outrage, but with understanding. He closed his notebook, but didn't walk off right away. "Some people think justice is a moment," he said. "It's not. Justice is a responsibility, and it starts with the small decisions you make before anyone's looking." And then he stepped down. No headlines followed, no trending topics, just a ripple, quiet but undeniable. Later that day, one of the recruits wrote something on a sticky note and left it inside his locker door. It read, "Justice is a weight. I'll carry it right." And somewhere, a story that could have ended in silence had already begun speaking through those who were finally listening. Darius didn't shout. He didn't fight back with anger. He stood in quiet strength and let the truth do the talking. His story reminds us that justice isn't always loud, but it's always worth standing for. This wasn't just about one man and one badge. It was about dignity, accountability, and the cost of silence. When we speak up not with noise, but with purpose, we shift the world, one truth at a time. If this story moved you, please like the video, share it with someone who still believes in justice, and subscribe to Mr. Mac's Stories for more powerful, true-to-life narratives. Your support means more than you know. It gives our team the strength to keep telling the stories others try to silence. Thank you for watching. And remember, truth has a memory, and it lives here.